it's definitely been a journey for me. So I could picture what you're going through in your first year and going through in the next year, and how you're visualizing your what you're going to scale to or what you want to aim for, which is it's fun.
Yeah.
My name is Sebastiano Cantali. I'm a Canadian, live in Montreal. Immigrant family. My grandfather came in from Italy, and I got into real estate shortly after university, graduated in finance. My friend and I bought a sixplex in Montreal, and then been buying ever since, and can't really let go of this bug of wanting to grow and grow and grow with other people. So it's that's the short version of who I am. Apart from all the other little entrepreneurial things we've all done in our own little lives, like I had a tutoring company. We did midterm and final exam prep for high school.
Mm,
Then I had an e-commerce for pre-owned appliances that we did extremely well in the first year, but my partners had some bigger projects that they wanted to focus on, so we ended up closing that company. And now I'm just full-time real estate. It's my first year full-time investing in real estate. We have a small portfolio, about 40 units in Montreal, and we're just looking to scale and grow and kind of make it a global thing instead of just local in my backyard, what I know.
right, right. So the entrepreneurial bug has always been there.
Always, always. Ever
Always.
since I was, I would say like 16, 17, I started cutting grass for neighbors and always working for a buck.
What is it that you don't like about regular jobs?
Um, so the problem I had was I'm okay working as many hours as need be, if working late hours, working early mornings. It was just more the sense of I had to go back and always ask for permission to do things, and I have to be there from 9 to 5, even though sometimes your busy time is not necessarily 9 to 5. It could be after hours, right? Or you're more productive in the morning. So the afternoon is not, it's just kind of a waste of time. Or it's just knowing that my value is worth more than what someone sees my value, and trading time for money is not what I like to do. I really, really value time. That's the one thing that you can never get back. You can always
Yeah.
make more money, but you can never get back your time. So for me, it's just enjoying what I do and being able to wanted to take a coffee on a Tuesday afternoon without having to ask permission. Can I step out? Was my motivator.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second about Canada, because you all of this you invest in Canada, you don't invest in the US, and most of the people that listen to us are local US investors. How is Canada so different from the US?
So the simplest difference, and I'll explain this as clean as possible, is in the States you have the 1031 exchange. So in the 1031 exchange, you can flip properties. So your profits that you're making on one property, you sell it and you flip it into the next property, and you're tax exempt. Here in Canada, the only tax exemption you get in real estate is when it's your primary residence. So if you live in the home and you sell it, you get to keep the profit from what you purchase from. On any revenue properties, there's always the capital gains tax we have to pay. We have to pay on when we sell. So the game here is kind of to do a full refi cash out, in the sense of you want to basically have a loan as big as possible so you can get your capital out. So the money you injected to buy the deal, renovate and everything, and then you want to do a refi, kind of like a clean burr. But you get all your money out and then the project still cash flows because you won't get taxed on the loan. So here we really try to keep the deal as much as we can, but there's still times like right now with interest rates being really, really high. If
You
there's
can't.
if there's too much money left on the table, we have to sell and go to the next deal. But we're going to get taxed heavily on the capital gains tax after that. So that's the biggest difference that I would say. We don't get to roll our deals into the next deal like you guys do.
Okay, so the scalability is a little harder. Does it? It takes longer. How do you see that affects the Canadian real estate market?
So Canadian real estate market is definitely a lot more leveraged, I would say, than the American side. So we have some loans here. So we kind of like your FHA loans in the States. We have government-backed loans called CMHC. So right now on the commercial side, CMHC now has is just introduced a new program in the last year or two. It's called MLI Select. So what it allows you to do is bring your amortization up to 50 years
Wow.
on some buildings, and it
50
gets you
years.
50 years on some buildings. It has to be approved based on
Wait, wait,
evaluations.
wait. Is this only for commercial or residential?
Commercial mostly. So
Okay.
residential, they have different. It's a different style type of loan. So kind of like your FHA 3.5% down on a single dwelling or like a single home or a duplex. You can put up to 5% down. So that's your 3.5%. We can put 5% down. That's the difference we do. And then if you do 3 and 4 units, so a triplex and a fourplex, you can do up to 10% down. So you can do that, and it's still covered by CMHC, and you could do a 30-year amortization on those.
Hmm. I see what you're
Where the
saying.
commercial side, there's a 50-year amortization you could go up to, and they're also lending 95% loan to value.
Hmm.
So
It's quite a lot.
we're really stretched. We are capped at the debt coverage ratios, but there's many factors that they cap you on. And most of the time, you're not getting the full 95% loan to value of the actual purchase price.
Okay.
But the strategy that we take is, let's say we're gonna buy the building, do our optimization. So either create value by increasing rents or by
Yeah.
diminishing the expenses, and then go and get the 95% loan to value on the new appraised value. So now you have all your cash out of the deal. So
Hmm.
because you have such a huge LTV and it's a 1.1 DCR, you can pretty much stretch that loan as pretty far and have almost little to no like, let's say, debt equity just sitting there.
So this allows you to cash flow from day one, would I assume?
So uh, if you're doing the 95% loan to value, yes, you will. They always make sure that the building is cash flowing even
Hmm.
after management fees and everything. But yes, it's a much lower cash flow because you have a stronger amort and you have a higher LTV and a lower DCR. That means your cash flow is very, very minimal at the end of the year. So
Hmm.
you have to be careful with how you structure your exit strategy. Our exit strategy is that refinance, but if you take out too much juice out of the property and a random expense or a big capex problem comes
Hmm.
in, you can have a problem there, right? So it's a different strategy because for us, it's like we have to try and optimize the whole building. Whereas when you do syndication in the States, you can technically syndicate or sorry, optimize a portion of the building or a portion of the rents and then go on to the next property. So
Yeah.
and still make money on that because you're just selling it.
Walk me through the refinance process in Canada. So usually here it'll be just like you buy the property, right? 2 years, you optimize it to increase the value, right? And then you refinance your equity, the equity that you built, the value that you built out, and then that money is tax free, ready to be deployed in your second deal, right? How does that work in Canada?
So in Canada, what we do is exactly like you mentioned. You want to do a refi, you get your cash out, and then inject it into the next deal, kind of like what you guys do with the 1031, just get the money out, inject it in the next deal. We have some regulations in the sense that they CMHC, the lender, the bigger lender, wants to make sure that you're taking the money that you're taking out of this one deal and injecting it back into the economy and back into real estate. So they always want to make sure that you're not just taking the money and say, "Hey, I'm going to take a nice vacation now." So they want to make sure that you're either optimizing your current building that you're doing the refinance on and adding more things to it, or going and invest into another deal. But like everything, there's always loops around that, and there's always little ways to get around these little things. Like just once you're doing the refinancing, making sure that you're showing them that you are interested on another property. But if the other property does fall through, let's say the offer that you made, they're not going to take back the funds. So there's a lot of regulations. There's also another regulation now that they just implemented to slow down the economy a bit because prices have been jumping here in Canada. So one of the things is they want to see that the money that you're taking out every 5 years, they want to see that it's been injected back in the last 5 years. So
Hmm.
even if you didn't inject it immediately, but in 5 years, have you bought more properties? Have you done other things? Or if you just are you just milking this building to do other things in your life?
So
So
pretty much for the refinance, you're getting a tax-free advantage right there, right? In Canada is the same.
exactly. Because
Oh,
it's a
okay.
loan. So you get
Okay.
you get no taxes on that. So
But
that's why.
they still want to make sure that you're
Yes.
injecting that back into the economy, back into the country.
Exactly. They want to make sure you're not just going and say, "Oh, I'm going to buy a nice luxury car now and do what I want," right?
What if you go and invest in another market, let's say in the US? So you take a refinance and then you buy a property in the US.
So it, they want to really try and keep it in the Canadian market.
Mm,
But there's always ways around it because let's say I and my partner decide to do the refi and we go and partner up on another deal. There are ways to show that because we partnered up on another deal, even if we didn't inject our own capital, because we own, let's say, 50% of the deal and it's $1 million project, there's 500,000 that was technically re-injected into this project, right? So they look at it in that way that are you still investing back into the Canadian market? Are you taking the time to be a landlord in the Canadian market? And as long as you show that interest of scaling portfolios in Canada, they're okay with most of the time of doing the refis and making sure that, you know what, we'll leave you the money and they see also your portfolio, right? They don't lend, like starting off, if you want to go and get a CMHC mortgage, it's not guaranteed you're going to get it. They want to make sure to do a thorough background check on you. Because it's a backed loan, they want to make sure that you can handle the portfolio. Are you one
mm,
that has experience managing tenants? Are you one that has experience managing buildings? If they don't, then they suggest, okay, since you don't have the experience, we're going to hire a property management company for the next 3-4 years to show you the ropes and everything. So you might have to pay extra fees on certain things.
mm.
So they kind of regulate you there on how to get your money out because they want to make sure that their backed loan, they're not going to have to go and do a callback on it, right?
That
So
they're protected. Talking about the portfolios, so here in the US, usually you get like your usual route to go is you buy a single family, two single family, then you jump into a duplex, fourplex, eightplex. Is that the same way in Canada, or is there a shortcut? Would you call it?
So I'm glad you asked that question. I get that question a lot. Everyone says like, what should I do? Should I buy a house? Should I buy a sixplex? Should I do a house hack? What should I do? I started with my partner. We bought a 6 unit right off the bat. We decided to stay at home at first and buy a 6 unit so inject our money. And then the year after we bought another 5 unit. But I ended up buying a house hack right now. So I bought a duplex, converted to a triplex, and that's how I created my value. I think right now, if you want to get into multifamily, especially in Canada, small multi like duplex conversions to triplexes are very important. It's a great way, first off, to just help you with the mortgage and payments that you have monthly, because house hacking is much cheaper than owning a house that's going to be $500,000-$600,000 here in Montreal, which is very common.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you have two tenants paying your rent, paying your mortgage that are going to help you out to live for either free or just your living expenses.
Yeah.
Um, and then you can also get that equity and build it into another portfolio or another property after. So usually I would say the best way to do it is to start with something small like a duplex, and then potentially figuring out what the value add strategy is for that unit, right? Here it was the main floor was a split level, so you had a basement and the main floor that you took over. I just lived in the main floor and took away the basement, and then created an apartment with it. So now I took my duplex, converted to a triplex, and I brought the value of the place up by $200,000 to $300,000.
Nice.
So
That's insane.
that's where I put the value in, and I saw the opportunity to now I could either refinance, I could sell it, or I can go and get a line of credit attached to the house with low interest and go and use that as my next down payment somewhere else.
Mm, okay. So I feel like that it's the same process to play the game. It's just a little it's a little harder with the capital tax gain once you actually start using money to buy rental properties, right?
Yeah, it's fairly similar as the American market in sense of lending. There's commercial loans, kind of like you guys do.
The
You do
SCR is the same thing.
the SCR is the same thing. It's just the debt coverage that they want to do. They want to make sure that debt servicing is good. It's very, very similar, and even the way the mortgage is calculated, I think there's only a difference of in the Canada or in the States. I think one of them is compounded one extra time. So it's just little things like that. But you guys do have other advantages like sub two and some of these other deals. You guys are a bit more creative on those ends that we don't really have here.
Can't do that in Canada. You can't do sub two in Canada.
I haven't heard of it. So if it happens, please someone let me know because I would love to do some sub twos here.
What?
Yeah, it's not very common here at all.
It's but so when you say it's not very common, is it like it's you think that you haven't do your research, or there's actually nobody doing it because it's illegal?
I can't confirm that it's illegal yet. I've been trying to network
Figure it
with
out.
exactly, network with, and figure it out with a few lawyers and figure out is there a way to do some of these things here. But it's not the same. Also, like, so perfect example. Let me clarify certain things. You guys have a lot of public data. So in the sense of your sold comps, your mortgage information, you could get someone's mortgage information. It's all public information in the
Yeah.
States. In Canada, it's all private information. So we don't have those
Mm.
rights. So you
Getting the
don't
list is
know.
harder.
Getting that information is much tougher. So you don't know where someone's mortgage is at, and what's going on, and what's the next step for them. And you guys also have 30-year interest rate locks. We don't have that.
Mm.
Someone can do a 10-year lock on an interest rate, but it's very uncommon. Here, the most common interest rate lock is a term of 5 years.
Mm.
So what sub two is all based on is those 2% interest rates that everyone's going to go and get on the last 2-3 years. Here, those are coming to an end, and now you would have to renew at an interest rate of 5-6%, 6.5%.
Mm.
So the sub two strategy here wouldn't work because your interest rate is locked up for 30 years. So
I see
that's
what
where
you're
we're
saying.
trying to get. We kind of have different perspectives. And if we were to try to get a 30-year interest term, it would be a much higher interest rate that even at that time.
Oh, because you're looking at 30 years. Do you see that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I don't see that often here because I know I think we call them here ARM loans,
Okay.
adjusted rate mortgage. I think that's what they stand for. I'm not a loan officer or anything like that. But yeah, that you usually get those for 5 years or 10 years, and then they kind of like readjust your rate. And I don't see that many people taking a look at those unless they know what they're doing exactly, right? Unless you have strategy. But for the most part, everybody goes for their 30 fixed rate. Yeah.
Exactly. 30
Yeah.
year fix, and this is your rate till you sell the property.
So I'll tell you roughly how I see the US. So we are seeing a lot of appreciation on the coast, right? Not so much on the Midwest, especially where we live, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, that area. Um, from my experience and the people that I talk to, it's a lot easier to capitalize in places like Colorado, right? Especially Denver, the coast, New York, like all those places, because the spreads are so much higher, right? You buy a house for 400, you flip it, you put 100 into it, and now you could sell it for 700, right? Like the spreads are a lot higher. Right here in the Midwest, that doesn't really happen. The spreads are not as big, right? You buy something for 90, and then you put 10 into it, you might sell it for 110,
Got
right?
it.
The biggest difference is that uh this market is not as it's not a primary market. If I can explain myself, and in regards to the cap rates are usually higher here because not a lot of people are putting money in here as they are in LA, New York. So the cap rate, which allows this place to be a lot more cash flow oriented, because I know a lot of people just come here to deposit the cash and get that cash flow, get that return
Mhm.
fixed for the rest of the 30 years that they have on their mortgage. How is it in Canada in terms of location? Where is the coast? Where is the Midwest? Where's the cash flow? Where's the appreciation?
I like it. I like that question. So, um, the three biggest provinces that are kind of like your New York, LA, and everything, you're looking at Quebec, which is Montreal here. Montreal is very, very expensive. Not as expensive as British Columbia and Toronto. The Ontario market is a fortune. You're looking at like $400,000 a unit in some of these in Toronto market, and we're talking about apartment complexes. Like we're talking about a 4 unit place is going for $400,000 an apartment. So you're getting high rents, but your cap rates over there are like 3%. They're very, very low.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
very low.
super low.
So Montreal is like a four cap every day. So Montreal, if you buy it at a four cap, it's like not bad. It's like
Don't quote me on this, but I think that where I live, commercial properties are between like 6 and 7.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
so here in Montreal, so just to give you perspective, I could even talk about one of my deals. One of the six plexes I purchased, which is not even on the island of Montreal, because it is an island where we're covered by both sides of the water, and just off the island is still just as expensive, but they consider it the greater Montreal region. Um, the South Shore is where I bought it. So I'm maybe 15 minutes by car to the downtown core of Montreal.
Mhm.
Okay. I bought that building, a 6 unit, for $900,000. Okay. And the cap rate when I bought it was about 2.8%. That's how low I bought it. It was, for me, it was a good deal because we evaluated the optimization process, and now we bought it for 900. A year and a half later, it just got evaluated for 1.7.
Okay,
So
yeah, almost double your money. And
almost
how
double our money. So at this point, uh, if you want to talk about double our money, we doubled our investment. So definitely there that we doubled, but almost doubled the whole value of the building. So
Mhm.
the cap rate, like a lot of people look at only on cap rate, and it's a great indicator, but there's also a cap rate is dictated by two things, right? Cap rate is dictated by your NOI, right? And the purchase price. And then if you take your NOI, you can separate it again in the sense of you have your revenues and your expenses.
Mhm.
So a lot of the times in Montreal, and I'll get more on the Montreal market on reasons why cap rates are low too. Um, Rents are very low because of the old style landlords that are here that didn't really increase rents for the longest time, and just the rules and regulations. So rents are really low here in Montreal,
Mm.
compared to Toronto and BC, which are way more expensive. So back to your question of Montreal, Toronto, Ontario market, and BC markets are your LA markets. They're very expensive to get in. Huge spreads, like you said, but also huge capital injections to get into those deals. And then you have, let's say, Alberta, like Edmonton and Calgary. Well, Calgary is actually a bit more expensive now, so just let's say Edmonton. You have the East Coast, like New Brunswick, like Moncton, and all those other places, that are a bit lower on the price per door, so they do cash flow a bit better on the buy. But there's still now a lot of investors throughout Canada are starting to look at these areas, kind of like investors in the States are starting to look at the Midwest because they see, well, where can I get the cash flow and the returns that I used to see in some of our markets? So we're going to the Midwest, and some of the investors are now looking to these markets here, that are good markets and still opportunity to improve these markets, but they're not as strong as the Montreal, Toronto, and BC market right now.
Gotcha. What's the government incentivizing? What do you see the programs going? What does the government want you to do?
So I wouldn't really use incentivization. So let's ask a question here. In the States, let's say in Iowa, where you're at, if you wanted to do a new construction, what's when you're submitting for those permits to build, what's the time frame usually? Like how long will you get those approvals by the city to start building your building? Do you
That's
know
a
more?
very good question. Actually, I will
So
have to get back on that one because I
get
don't
back to
know.
me
Yeah.
because some of these places, like in Montreal, you're looking
Yeah.
at 2 years worth of bureaucracy before you can actually start building. So now you have holding costs on the land or the building that you bought. And for 2 years, you've been holding this building and you can't do anything to it
But pay taxes.
but pay taxes and hope for the government to approve your plans.
That doesn't sound very investor friendly.
So you have those problems, and that's like there's no, and that's one of the things we have right now is the reason why some of these rents and the price of the housing market is skyrocketing that are fortunes, is because we have low supply. Kind of like
Mm.
in the States, you guys have low supply. We have low supply for the amount of immigrants that are coming in, and the amount of locals that want to buy. There's not enough, and there's not enough incentivization by the government to build new to get the houses built. And now with the material costs that jump up, a lot of developers are slowly shifting away from houses and condos and just doing residential multifamily properties because there's more money to be made there. And with the higher loans, higher LTVs, they could keep the property instead of having to liquidate everything. And there's a better margin there. So
Mm.
there's different things that are happening in Canada, and I'm curious to hear more about what's happening in the States. But and then there's a different perspective that you're gonna have mixed opinions on this, but we're heavily regulated in some of these areas, like Quebec, Ontario, and BC are heavily regulated on tenant laws. So we're kind of like the New York of
Oh, that's bad.
yes. So Quebec has a lot of tenant laws that protect. And I'm not saying this in a sense of like I'm a landlord that like we should have all the rights. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this. There are some landlords who are just like kind of like slumlords that just let it rot the building. And I agree. The tenant should be protected there. But so we have something called the tribunal. That's the tenant board here in Quebec. We can pretty much at most increase our rents by 2% at
Oh
most.
wow. Wow.
The
How
years of
long
inflation of like 7% didn't help us in any way.
you're screwed. How long does it take you to get somebody out of the property?
It depends. Like if you're trying to negotiate with them, if you're just trying to help them relocate, whatever it is, there's so many things. Like okay, so if a tenant doesn't pay, so here's your nightmare stories. Okay, what
Okay.
is it in Iowa?
2 months. I mean, like
2 months. Okay,
average.
okay. So in Montreal, in Canada, in Quebec, you're looking at 3 to 4 months just for the court hearing. Once you get the court hearing, and let's say you do get the judgment that you're right, you do have the right to evict someone because they're not paying. There's another month before you receive the letter, and then you have to go and get him out. So it might be a 5 to 6 month period, depending on how quick the court dates are. That's not so bad in Ontario right now. There are um, there are judgment dates and courts and non-paying tenants that have been there for over a year now
Wow.
because they're so delayed on their processes and everything. And there's some tenants that are I've heard nightmare stories that they come in they pay the first month's rent to sign the lease, and then they turn around to the landlord and they said, "Good luck getting the next 10 months worth of payments." Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I've heard
S-
of many stories like this.
So is this like your typical day in Canada, or is just like one of those it happens once in a while?
Look, like every bad landlord, there's a bad tenant, right? So
Right.
it doesn't happen often. And the way I like to look at things is treat if you want good service and everything, like kind of like running like a business, right? You want to treat them fairly. You want to make sure they're happy to live there. You want to make sure that you take care of the property so that you don't have these problems. They see that you're invested in building and you're making sure that their well-being is your priority, and the reverse is usually given back. Usually, I'm not saying it's always the case, but it's not one of those common things that you hear about often. But it's going to be a story that most people talk about because it's the nightmare story, right? No one really talks about all the great stories that are out there.
Mhm. Yeah, that is huge. And for Canada, I know we were talking this before the podcast. Regulations, that brings me back to short-term rentals. I know you were
Yeah,
talking about it. I
yeah.
just saw the news that Dallas banned all short-term rentals,
Mhm.
which is insane. Imagine how many people are going to be underwater because of that, or their houses are going to be at a big discount because they need to liquidate quick. How's that in
Yeah.
Canada?
So in Canada, these regulations have been around for a while now. Actually, in Montreal, we've had regulations about where you can do Airbnbs. Short-term rentals are not very common in Montreal, even though we're a very touristy city. So there's specific zones that you're allowed to do them. You got to get specific permits for it, and they're not giving that many permits. And depending on the zone, like most of the Airbnbs in Montreal are actually illegal. A lot of people have been doing a lot of illegals in Montreal. And recently, there was a story that just happened maybe 3 4 months ago in the old port, which is like very close to the downtown core of Montreal, with these historical buildings. There was a gentleman doing Airbnb. I don't know if he had his permits or not, but the whole building caught fire. There was some casualties, and because of that, Airbnb actually wiped out all the illegal Airbnb apartments in Montreal. So they came in because there's a huge story about this. They had to clean sweep what was happening in Montreal. So now it's been getting even worse and tougher. Even our cottages up north, there's a lot of zones now that are not giving Airbnb permits anymore or are removing Airbnb permits. Same thing in Ontario. They just passed some laws in different cities like Hamilton and stuff like that short-term rentals are no longer valid. So we've been getting this for a long time. So now that Dallas is starting to implement some of these things, people are shifting. And look, you can look at it as a problem. It's like, oh, I got to liquidate my home or I'm not going to be making money. Or you can shift your focus and maybe look at midterm rentals and other things like for nurses and executives. But you just got to really try and pivot and change the game plan. But short-term rentals here have always been very, very strict on the laws, and there aren't many areas like every condo complex here in Montreal. You're not allowed to do any short-term rentals.
Wow.
Yeah, and most of the time when I've rented, let's say a condo or so on and so forth, they tell you like keep quiet, don't say anything to the front desk officer saying you come and visit a friend or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of illegal Airbnb or short-term rentals in Montreal, but everyone wants to get in the game, right? There's a lot of money to be made there. So a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'll take the chance and I'll take the risk of getting the fine. And if the fine comes, I'll pay it at that point.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Why would someone want to invest in the US? So are Canadians looking to invest in the US market, or is the other way around?
I don't know many Americans who are looking to invest in Canada, even though your dollar is much stronger than ours. But I think a lot of Canadians want to invest in the American market just because the scale of the supply is different, right? You guys have 10 times our population and 10 times the supply at that point, and we look at that as opportunity for us as well, right? And we also look at it from a different perspective where we have to get really creative to create value in some of our buildings because of these strong tenant laws. We could go to some of these states where it's more favorable for the landlord to have a building and have these investments. So for us, it's like, oh, great. All the things and troubles that we had here, we could technically implement there. And that would be like our strategic advantage for us in some of these properties. So I think a lot of Canadians, from what I've been networking with, a lot of them would like to start investing in the States and don't know how because of legal implication and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of people that are looking at the American market, whether it's for short-term rentals, for vacation homes, or even for multifamily. There are a lot of opportunities to get into the American market, whether you're a capital partner or if you're actually the active partner on some of these deals.
Wow, that's insane. I didn't think that many people will be willing to invest in the US.
You'd be surprised. Like the American dollar is stronger than ours, so there's already that advantage to start to collect American money coming our way, right? And then there's some great value add opportunities or cash flowing properties, like you said, in the Midwest that we can put our money in, get cash flow day one, whereas some of these Canadian cities we can't even do that.
I see what you're saying. Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, if anybody else has any other question, I'll make sure I'll give it back to you, and then we'll get it answered. But I think this is a pretty good stopping point. Thank you so much, Sebastiano, for all the information. I
Love
didn't
it.
know how
Love
the
it.
things were run and go in Canada, but now I can say that I know how they go roughly. So I
Roughly,
appreciate
yeah.
your time.
And if there's anything, like I said, if you're ever curious, I can always get you answers or we can go through some deals and everything. I enjoyed the podcast. I enjoy your time and you're amazing individual. You're doing some great things. Looking forward to seeing what you're working on next.
Hell yeah. If you made it this far in the video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one.